All right, so let's take a look at the article here. I want to share some of it. I want to read some of it to you. And we're going to take a deep dive into some of her main points and just kind of give you some of my commentary and thoughts on them. Now, I had never read anything by Helen Andrews before, but I did find this really enjoyable. I thought it was a really interesting read. I shared it with multiple people, different group chats and things that I'm in. And if you're on locals, you probably have already come across it. I think I had it in one of my newsletters recently. I shared this article. And so if you haven't signed up for our newsletter, I would also encourage you to do that, which you can do on our website. And so she starts the article with this story about Larry Summers, who was a previous president at the University of Harvard. Larry Summers gave a talk that was supposed to be off the record, where you can see here it says that he was talking about the different availability of aptitude at the high end of the intellectual spectrum, saying that that's partially why females are underrepresented in hard sciences. It's not attributable to socialization. Basically saying that it's not just because women don't choose sciences, or they're conditioned, as many feminists like to believe, that women are just, they're discouraged from joining the sciences, from taking part in the hard sciences and going to medical school and those sorts of things. He says it's actually because that in some of the harder sciences, when you're talking about Harvard and these like really intellectual places that are very demanding academically, that there tends to be this disparity between IQ, the highest ends, between men and women. Now, what's interesting about that is typically, if you look at, there's always the kind of umbrella curve when it comes to IQ. What I've seen, the data that I've seen, and what I think he's referring to a little bit here, or was referring to many years ago, is that the women tend to be in the middle of that umbrella. They're much more close together, where men tend to represent more of the extremes of the spectrum. So men are both the dumbest and the smartest, and then you have a lot of women who are in the middle. The gap between the average woman is not as strong as the gap between the average couple of men. And so that's kind of the point that he was trying to make. And he he ended up, I think he resigned or he got fired for just making those comments in a private meeting. And what she goes on to say here is that the cancellation was feminine. You can see this here at the beginning of this paragraph. I'm going to read directly from Andrew. She says, the cancellation was feminine, the essay argued, because all cancellations are feminine. Cancel culture is simply what women do whenever there are enough of them in a given organization or field. That is the Great Feminization Thesis, which the same author later elaborated upon at book length. Everything you think of as wokeness is simply an epiphenomenon of demographic feminization. And so she goes on to say, it unlocks the secrets of the era that we're living in. Wokeness is not a new ideology, an outgrowth of Marxism, or a result of post-Obama disillusionment. It is simply feminine patterns of behavior applied to institutions where women were few in number until recently. And then she's like, how did I not see it before? And so I thought this is really interesting. So she's getting into this topic of talking about how his cancellation was very feminine, because what they said, the arguments against him earlier in the article, she says they made emotional appeals rather than logical arguments. Quote, when he started talking about innate differences in aptitude between men and women, I just couldn't breathe because this kind of bias makes me physically ill. These are the kinds of things she's talking about. That's an emotional argument. This is what I get into with people all the time, especially women. I'm in multiple comments battles right now with women on Facebook, Instagram, you name it. And what it often is an emotional appeal. I'm talking with people about taxes. I'm talking about SNAP. I'm talking about all these different topics right now, welfare, you name it, any of these issues, immigration, think about being soft on crime. A lot of these things are made with emotional appeal. They're not made with logical reasoning. And so how does society start to look when you start to lead with emotion rather than with logic, structure, and hierarchy? That's really what the Great Feminization theory is all about. It's this kind of restructuring from hierarchy, order, and duty to now having this emotion, comfort, and equality at all costs. Think of this same thing when I talk to men about, hey, you should wear pants to mass. You should dress nicely. Your minimum for mass should be pants and a collared polo. Usually the people that will fight back against me on this is women. It's either women or it's typically very feminine or effeminate men that will come back and say, oh, well, what about this? And what about comfort? And what about Jesus accepts you as you are? And there really is. This is why you see so many men now flocking to more traditional religions, to Orthodoxy and to Catholicism, because we don't like this emotional appeal. We don't just want to constantly be Jesus loves you as you are. That's kind of something that women enjoy more. They like the words of affirmation, feeling loved. It's kind of written on every woman's heart. And John Eldredge gets into some of this with Captivating and Wild at Heart. He says that the woman's primary question is, am I lovely? Am I loved? Am I beautiful? Those sorts of things. Where the man has this question of, do I have what it takes? And those are two very different questions. And so duty, responsibility, those sorts of things, authority, hierarchy, that's why we love the Catholic Church. That's why we love order. We love structure. We love having these positions that we have to get into. I like that I have to kneel and I receive communion in a specific way. And I do these different things throughout the Mass because what I do with my body impacts how I pray, how I believe, what I, how I go about my life. She goes on here. Let me share again because this part is really important. She says, I think of feminization as something that happened in the past before I was born. When we think about women in the legal profession, for example, we think of the first woman to attend law school in 1869, the first woman to argue a case before the Supreme Court in 1880, or the first female Supreme Court justice in 1981. But, she says, a much more important tipping point is when law schools became majority female, which occurred in 2016, or when law firm associates became majority female, which occurred in 2023. When Sandra Day O'Connor was appointed to the High Court, only 5% of judges were female. Today, women are 33% of the judges in America and 63% of the judges appointed by President Joe Biden. And so that's really telling. This is the point here, is that not only are women being admitted, are these kind of groundbreaking things that we think about all the time of the Amelia Earharts and the first woman to do this and the first woman to do that, but we're getting to the point where we're seeing majority women in a lot of these spaces and a lot of these places that are really guiding and dictating society. I mean, how often if you're on X and you actually follow news stories and things on violent criminals, when you see people who are repeat offenders that are getting released on bail, cashless bail, all these sorts of things, 9 times out of 10, not always, maybe not 9 times, maybe 7, 8 times out of 10, is a female judge that has let this person off. This repeat offender, violent criminal, over and over and over again, repeat offending. And what's sad is, like with the foreign woman, the white woman who was stabbed in the neck on the train, and that guy had been arrested like 39 times or something crazy like that. Here you look up, it's this female judge, I believe, that let him out over and over again, and then he kills this woman. And it's like women tend to suffer the most because of these things, and yet they'll still put these policies in place. Why?